July 18, 1944, 13:40 hours. A farm road 3 miles south of Caen, Normandy. Hauptmann Hans Planck was commanding the lead tank in a column of 14. Panzer IVs moving forward to support German defensive lines under heavy pressure from British armor. The bocage landscape, thick hedgerows circling small fields, cut down visibility and forced the armored column to push along narrow rural roads. Planck's mission was simple: reach the defensive line before British troops broke through, fight enemy tanks, and keep the position. It was normal armored planning for such a situation. The afternoon was bright, visibility excellent. Planck could hear artillery far away, but nothing that warned of an immediate attack. His column rolled forward quickly, using the clear weather to gain distance before Allied aircraft certain to appear forced them to scatter for shelter. By mid-1944, German tactics required movement only in brief moments when Allied air superiority was temporarily absent from certain zones. The sound reached Planck before he saw the planes. A deep mechanical growl, and like the thin high-altitude hum of Bomberser, the sharp, ripping scream of fighters. This noise was lower, heavier, suggesting enormous force being thrown down at ground level. Planck glanced up instinctively and saw them. 4 British aircraft diving nearly straight down on his column, coming in at speeds that looked impossible from such a low height. The planes were short-winged, thick-bodied, coated in camouflage meant to hide them, yet somehow they stood out clearly in the summer air. They were Hawker Typhoons, and Planck had perhaps 3 seconds to recognize them before the rockets arrived. The lead Typhoon released 8 rockets in a rippling burst, their 60-pound warheads racing on flaming motors toward Planck's tank. With almost no time to dodge, the rockets slammed into the Panzer IV in front of Planck's vehicle, cutting through the upper armor and exploding inside the crew space. The tank blew apart instantly, its turret hurled aside by secondary blasts from stored ammunition. Smoke and fire blocked the road ahead. The second Typhoon aimed at Planck's own tank, and he heard the rocket's harsh whoosh, felt the impacts shake the hull, and then nothing. His tank had stopped being a fighting machine and become a steel coffin, holding 5 men who never even realized they had died. The armor meant to protect them from anti-tank guns, could not stop rockets built to punch through 6 inches of steel. The last 2 Typhoons struck the rear tanks of the line, trapping the whole column between burning wrecks at both the front and back of the formation. The Typhoons finished their run and pulled away into the sky, the entire attack lasting no more than 30 seconds from first rocket to last. Explosion. 4 aircraft had turned 14 tanks into blazing ruins with weapons German planners never imagined ground support fighters would carry. The few men who escaped their tanks before the ammunition cooked off reported the unbelievable efficiency of the Streitkado German headquarters. Their report stated clearly that the Typhoons came without warning, struck with overwhelming fire, and disappeared before any defense could be formed. The psychological shock was immediate and severe. If German armor could not move in daylight without being destroyed within seconds of being seen, then mobile warfare was finished. The failed fighter, the Hawker Typhoon, had not begun its story with victory, but with near-total failure that almost canceled the entire project. The aircraft was designed to be a high-altitude interceptor to aid the Spitfire, but it proved disastrously unfit for that purpose due to design weakness and mechanical troubles that killed pilots far too often. The Napier Sabre engine, a massive 24-cylinder beast making more than 2,000 horsepower, was radical in theory but full of problems in actual use. The engine overheated easily under extended running, forcing pilots to monitor temperatures constantly. Carbon monoxide leaked from the engine into the cockpit, causing pilots to lose consciousness mid-flight. The cooling system was too weak for high-altitude flight, causing power drops exactly where an interceptor needed peak performance. The structure was worse still. Early Typhoons suffered deadly failures in the rear fuselage during fast maneuvers, with the tail section literally breaking off the aircraft. Several pilots were killed when their planes tore apart in combat, creating understandable fear among Typhoon units about whether their machine scow would survive hard turns. The issue was finally Trisetto poor reinforcement at the fuselage joint, but repairing it required major modifications to every aircraft already built. The high-altitude performance that justified the Typhoon's entire design turned out to be non-existent. The thick wing built for low-altitude power made too much drag at height. Reducing speed and climb, the engine's performance collapsed sharply above 15,000 feet, making the Typhoon slower than the German fighter it was intended to intercept. As a high-altitude interceptor, the Typhoon was a complete failure. RAF pilots called it the flying coffin and the Tiffy, with a mix of attachment and frustration. An aircraft that seemed almost intent on killing its own pilots through mechanical faults rather than enemy fire. Some pilots refused to fly Typhoons and requested moves to Spitfire units. Accident rates were terrible. More Typhoons were destroyed by engine failures than by enemy action during the aircraft's early service. Ending the entire program was seriously discussed in 1942. But the Typhoon had one quality that eventually justified its difficult development at low altitude. It was faster and more powerful than any fighter flying at the time. The thick wing that caused problems high in the sky produced excellent lift close to the ground. The troublesome Sabre engine, if kept below 10,000 feet where it ran dependably, produced power that gave the Typhoon incredible speed just above treetop level. These traits suggested a new job entirely, not an interceptor, but a ground attack aircraft built for destroying targets on the ground rather than battling fighters in the air. The transformation began. The Decimated shift Typhoons from failed interceptors to ground attack fighters needed both mechanical upgrades and new tactical doctrine. The plane's natural features, huge engine power, thick armor, steady gun platform fit, missions that high-altitude fighters never attempted. Engineers and tacticians worked together to build capabilities had never been part of the Typhoon's original plan. The change in weapons was dramatic. Typhoons first carried 4 20mm Hispano cannons, fine for fighter combat but devastating against ground targets. Each gun fired armor-piercing and high-explosive shells at 600 rounds per minute, delivering destructive force able to rip apart light vehicles, silence anti-aircraft posts, and smash tank weak spots on the top and rear. The guns were mounted in the wings, forming a converging fire pattern that focused the 4 cannons' output on a single point. But the truly revolutionary addition was the RP-3 rocket projectile 3-inch, 60-pound warhead on a simple rocket motor that changed the Typhoon from a heavily armed fighter into flying artillery. Each Typhoon carried 8 rockets on rails under the wings, giving one plan of firepower equal to a light cruiser's broadside. The rocket's ability to punch armor beat mana-specialized anti-tank guns. The 60-pound warhead could pierce 6 inches of steel through a mix of impact force and explosive energy. Accuracy was limited compared to artillery, but revolutionary for air-delivered weapons. Pilots learned to dive steeply 45 degrees or more, firing rockets at ranges where the path was predictable and target movement barely mattered. The rockets fired in a ripple, spreading slight light to form a pattern that increased the chance of a hit. Even if only 1 or 2 rockets hit the target directly, the others landed close enough to cause serious damage. Through blast and fragments, structural updates to the Typhoon greatly improved its survival rate. Armor plate protected. The pilot from ground fire critical for an anti-hill and mile. Aircraft flying so low that every rifle could potentially damage it. The fuel tanks were self-sealing, reducing fire risk from bullet hits. The engine gained better cooling that prevented overheating at the low altitude, ensuring the aircraft actually worked. The tail was strengthened to stop the fatal failures that had killed early pilots. Tactical doctrine developed through real combat. Typhoon. Pilots learned to approach targets at extremely low heights, often under 100 feet, where German anti-aircraft guns had almost no time to track them. They learned to attack in groups so that several aircraft hit one target at once. Overwhelming defenses with sheer numbers of rockets. They learned which targets could be destroyed by rocket sand, which needed cannon fire instead. The change from intercept toward ground attack aircraft took about 18 months, from early tests to full tactical doctrine. By D-Day in June 1944, Typhoon squadrons were trained, armed, and ready for missions that would terrify German troops throughout the Normandy battles. The German encounter. German forces first met Typhoon rocket attacks in northern France in early 1944, but the weapon's true power became clear during the Normandy campaign, when mass Typhoon strikes proved the aircraft's ability to reliably destroy armored vehicles with accurate rocket fire. The psychological effect was immediate and far larger than the actual kill. Numbers. Typhoons attacked with shocking force 8 rockets launched at unsecreted sites and sounds far greater than what a single aircraft should produce. Rockets' unique whooshing sound as they screamed toward their target spam. An audio warning German troops quickly learned to fear. The explosions when rockets hit were brutal, often causing secondary blasts that destroyed vehicles completely. Oberst Heinrich Eberbach commanded a Panzer Grenadier division during the Normandy fighting and went through Typhoon attacks again and again. His reports described both the weapon's effectiveness and its psychological shock. British rocket-firing aircraft represent a grave threat to armored operations. The attacks happened with almost no warning. Aircraft approached at extremely low height, making them hard to see or detect by radar. The rockets were fired from distance too short for effective anti-aircraft response. The impacts were catastrophic. Direct hits punched through the armor of even heavy tanks, causing total vehicle loss. Trying to dodge offered no protection. Best the rockets spread out as they flew. Eberbach's division lost about 40% of its armor to air attack over 3 weeks of fighting in Normandy. Not every loss was caused by Typhoons, but after-action analysis confirmed that rocket-armed aircraft were responsible for most armor casualties. The psychological effect on surviving crews was severe. Many tankers refused to move during daylight, crippling German tactical mobility. The bocage terrain, which should have provided cover for German armor, instead became a killing zone for Typhoons. The narrow lanes between hedgerows funneled German vehicles into predictable paths that Typhoon pilots learned to monitor. When Typhoons spotted armor moving along these routes, the vehicle had almost no room to maneuver and could not spread out. The hedgerows that blocked ground-level sightlines were irrelevant to attacking aircraft, which could watch movements from above and attack from angles. Where the hedgerows offered no protection. German anti-aircraft defenses proved nearly useless against fast, low-flying targets. Standard Flak 38 and Flak 43 anti-aircraft guns worked well against medium-altitude bombers but failed to track Typhoons racing at 400 miles per hour, only a few feet above the trees. Time between spotting a Typhoon and the moment it reached firing range was too short for gun crews to aim and shoot effectively. Typhoons attacking in groups made defense even harder. Gun crews could target one aircraft, while the others attacked freely. The Falaise Pocket. The destruction of German forces during the Falaise Pocket encirclement in August 1944 showed Typhoon power at its most devastating. German Army Group WWII is trapped in a tightening pocket by Allied ground forces. With only one escape route through the Falaise Gap, concentrated Allied air power, including continuous Typhoon missions, turned the retreat into a disaster. The tactical situation was perfect for Typhoon. German units were crowded into a small area with few roads, making targets easy to find. The desperate need to escape forced German commanders to move vehicles in daylight despite the air threat. The clear summer weather gave excellent visibility for attacking. Aircraft. Allied air superiority meant the Luftwaffe could not interfere at all. Typhoon. Squadrons flew non-stop missions throughout the battle, attacking any German vehicle attempting to use the escape roads. The narrow lanes became killing zones filled with destroyed armor, vehicles, and equipment. Pilots described the attacks as shooting gallery conditions, where targets were so numerous that ammunition was the only limit. Some squadrons flew 6 or 7 missions a day, returning to rearmen refuel before heading out again. The destruction numbers were astonishing. Estimates indicate Allied air power destroyed or damaged about 300 German tanks and self-propelled guns during the Falaise operations, with Typhoon's responsible for a major share of these kills. Thousands of trucks, cars, and horse-drawn wagons were also destroyed, effectively wiping out German Army Group B's ability to move or supply itself. The visual evidence was overwhelming. Reconnaissance photos showed roads completely jammed with wrecked vehicles, with surviving German troops abandoning equipment and fleeing on foot. German survivor accounts highlight the psychological terror of the experience, trapped with no air cover. Under non-stop attack from aircraft they could not fight, watching vehicles explode around them and knowing that movement almost guaranteed death. The experience shattered unit organization, caused panic far beyond the actual situation. Some German units surrendered instead of trying to break through areas where Typhoon attacks were most intense. General der Panzertruppen Hans Eberbach, who commanded German forces trying to keep the pocket open, wrote after being captured, "British rocket-firing aircraft made any organized withdrawal impossible. Any vehicle movement brought attacks that destroyed multiple vehicles. We lost more armor to air attack during the retreat than we lost to ground fighting throughout the entire earlier campaign." The Typhoon attacks were more demoralizing than ground combat because our soldiers had no way to respond. We could fight enemy tanks, but not aircraft that destroyed our vehicles from above. The flying gas can nickname reflected the complicated relationship Typhoon pilots had with their aircraft, which combined outstanding combat ability with real operational dangers that could not be ignored. The flying gas can nickname reflected the aircraft's huge fuel load and the serious fire risk it create when the aircraft was hit by ground fire. The Sabre engine's massive power needs required enormous fuel capacity, nearly 800 gallons spread throughout several tanks in the wings and fuselage. This fuel supply gave the Typhoon long range and strong endurance, but it also meant the aircraft was essentially a flying fuel store, vulnerable to any round that pierced the airframe, even with self-sealing tanks and armored protection. Hits in certain places could trigger deadly fires. Pilot casualties stayed high throughout Typhoon missions because the low-altitude role kept them constantly exposed to ground fire from weapons ranging from rifles to heavy anti-aircraft guns. One lucky shot could stop the engine, break a fuel line, or injure the pilot. Typhoon losses to ground fire during the Normandy campaign averaged about 5% per sortie, acceptable for a short campaign, but impossible to sustain long-term. The aircraft's visibility from the ground was another weakness. The Typhoon was large, noisy and approached at altitude sure troops could spot it easily. German soldiers learned to identify the aircraft by both sound and shape, giving them a few seconds to hide or fire small arms. Some German units created tactics that focused available weapons on incoming Typhoons, producing a wall of fire that sometimes scored hits through sheer luck. Yet pilots kept flying the aircraft and praising what it could do, despite very real dangers. Squadron leader Roland Beament, who flew Typhoons throughout the campaign, summed up the contradiction clearly. The Typhoon was a dangerous aircraft to fly. The engine required careful handling. The fuel load meant constant fire risk. And low-altitude missions meant non-stop exposure to enemy fire. But the aircraft's combat performance was unquestionable. We could destroy targets that other aircraft could not attack. Effectively, the rockets gave us the ability to kill tanks and heavy vehicles that previously required specialized anti-tank aircraft or artillery. The danger was worth the results we achieved. The final assessment. The Hawker Typhoon represent an unusual success, an aircraft that failed at everything it was originally built to do, but succeeded brilliantly in the role it was adapted to fill. It was risky to fly, hard to maintain, and frightening to operate at the altitude. Sure, it was most effective, but it destroyed German armor with a level of efficiency no other Allied aircraft matched. The critical phases of the Normandy campaign. Hans Planck's Panzer column, wiped out in 30 seconds by 4 Typhoons near Cannes, was one of many similar engagements. Concentrated rocket strikes destroyed German forces before they could challenge Allied ground troops. The combined effect of these attacks, the destroyed tanks, the disrupted movement, the collapsing morale, contributed heavily to Germany's defeat in Normandy. The flying gas can that pilots feared and German soldiers learned to dread became one of the key war's most effective ground attack weapons through a mix of fortunate design traits and smart adaptation. It was not elegant, not safe, and not designated for the mission it eventually performed, but it worked with devastating success against German armor during a time when such capability was critically important. The deep mechanical roar that signaled a Typhoon's arrival became the sound German tank crews feared more than artillery, more than enemy armor, more than any threat they faced in Normandy, because that sound meant rockets were coming. And when rockets struck, armor became a coffin instead of protection. The British had built a weapon that erased Panzer divisions not through advanced technology, but through practical adaptation of a troubled fighter into a role where its strengths became overwhelming. Advantages. The Typhoon's legacy is its proof that failures can become successes and creative thinking finds new uses for flawed designs. The interceptor that nearly killed more British pilots than German aircraft became the ground attack platform that terrified German forces and contributed significantly to Allied victory in Normandy. That transformation from near total failure to lethal success showed a British engineering mindset that valued effectiveness over elegance and results over theoretical perfection.